You're watching Behind the Headlines. I'm Pacchia. The past 5 years have been a really difficult time for law firms, particularly in the business development sense. Joining me now to talk about what firms can do to weather the storm, we have Tim Corcoran, consultant to law firms at the Corcoran Consulting Group. We should note that Bloomberg Law is one of his clients. Tim, thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Happy to be here.
So let's get a feel for the market. We talk a lot about how demand, particularly on the transactional side, hasn't been so hot in the second half of 2012. We have some indications that it's starting to turn the corner in the M&A space, but it's still not fantastic. You see a different picture. How so?
Well, there's no question that demand in some practices is down, but we also have to understand the perspective of the people talking about the decreasing demand. For some law firms and for some practices in big law firms, demand has shifted. It's not necessarily gone away. Sometimes their clients have taken more work in-house. Sometimes they've shifted that work to smaller law firms. Mid-sized law firms right now are experiencing unprecedented growth. And LPOs and alternative service providers are seeing a very high trajectory and growth path right now.
For the work that still is out there for big law firms, we're starting to see a situation, well, was talking about a situation that involves the term suicide pricing. It's a trend that was discussed when we had Bruce McEwen back on the show. We have a clip for you and want to run it.
This industry has excess capacity. Industries with excess capacity, it happens to the airlines every decade or so, face enormous pricing pressure because they have fixed costs they want to cover, and they will do almost anything they can to get revenue in the door. That's what some big law firms have been doing in what I call these suicidal pricing submissions in response to RFPs or whatever. They just want to get the business, and they'll worry about whether or not they make money later.
What do you think about that? Is big law stuck in a race to the bottom in the pricing space?
Yeah, Bruce is absolutely right, but I'm not sure that's the full picture. I think all law firm leaders could get a great lesson in microeconomics from Bruce and others. What he's describing happens all the time. There's a maxim in many law firms: let's win the work and then we'll figure out how to do it later. And that, in a particularly price pressure time, it can be very challenging to law firm profits because they're winning the work at prices that they can't sustain and their cost structure can't sustain. However, there are firms that are figuring this out. It's hard to tell from the outside, but firm A may have done nothing to adjust its cost structure and its cost of delivering legal services, yet it lowers its prices to incent the clients to hire them. But firm B may have taken a hard look at its process, the way it delivers legal services, its infrastructure, its associate and staff costs, and using business process improvement, found a way to lower the cost of delivering legal services. So even in a price pressure environment where revenues are declining or flat, they're able to profit.
So you've said before that business development is more about data than relationships. Could you unpack that for us? What does that mean?
Sure. Maybe a more appropriate statement would be it's as much about data as it is about relationships. Relationships are critical. They never go away. But I think the key here is not every relationship has the same value to a law firm. It's important to understand the relative profitability and the relative benefit and the relative growth of various relationships, various client relationships, various markets that law firms can pursue, and then make their decisions accordingly and devote resources to those that will give them the greatest return.
So how do you do it? I mean, we were talking before off camera about how law firms need to look at the spaces in which their clients operate and try to figure out where they're going to be in a couple of years. It sounds like something you need to hire a big consulting firm to work out. How is law firm A supposed to start to think in those terms?
Sure. I don't think it's rocket science, and I don't think you need to hire one of the big name consulting firms to help. We have some very savvy business professional analysts in many of the big law firms today, and certainly there are folks who they can bring on to do that on a project basis. But the point here is that many law firms look at their history to guide their future actions. So, for example, most law firms look at their top 100 revenue-producing clients from the prior year. But they don't look at profit, they don't look at the growth potential or the repeatability of that business. So many then take the next step of saying, well, let's do a white space analysis. On one axis we have the clients, and the other axis we have our practices. And anytime there's a gap where we're not delivering services to that client in that practice area, let's pursue that work. But I think what's greater a benefit to the firm is starting to fill in the blanks. In those opportunities, they're not all equal. Maybe we're not as profitable delivering services in this area as we are over there. Maybe this client here has no chance of repeatability. Maybe these matters over here are not as profitable, and the client is in trouble. So there's a lot of factors we can plug in there and turn that white space into what I'd call a green space analysis, a more informed, fully robust analysis using internal data, and external market data.
I mean, I would imagine some firms would say that the whole idea is cost prohibitive in a sense, that you're taking lawyers away from generating revenue to try to figure out what the business is going to look like in the near and long-term future. What do you say to them?
Well, they have the data at their disposal now. They just don't use it well. So their finance folks and the business development folks can do a lot of the number crunching and then present information to the lawyers who, as owners, can make decisions how they want to apply and devote the resources. I think what they'll find is there's a relative return. There's a different relative return for each practice. Yeah. And they can choose to continue to pursue a practice that is not as profitable as another. Perhaps it's a feeder to another practice that's far more profitable. That's a business decision they can make, but they should make it with informed data.
In your day-to-day, are you finding people in big law get this, or is this just anathema to them?
I think many partners have grown up with the assumption the more hours they bill, the more clients they pursue, we've got other levers to figure out how to make profit. And they haven't really seen that one way to drive profit is through the cost structure. And that's not just finding lower overhead or cheaper space or fewer people, but that's saying how can we be more adept at finding the right clients, lower our cost of acquisition, maybe cross-selling better, maybe finding the clients whose geographic and needs better match our own footprint, our own geography, our own practice strengths.
Can we name names here? Are there any firms out there that stand out to you as really understanding this dynamic and employing that in their business development practices?
Well, I'm hesitant to name names of firms because, for the most part, it's not a firm culture that we're talking about here. There are individual practices and sometimes partners within individual practices that pursue these on a very rigorous basis. On a firm-wide basis, it's few and far between to see firm leadership and partners across the entire footprint of a large firm to say, yes, we're on the same page. Many still have pockets of opportunity that they pursue on their own.
I mean, eventually that gap is going to have to get bridged, so to speak. How do you kind of get to that point where management committees are employing these tactics, and it's not just department heads in isolated departments around the firm?
I think when we try to employ change with any law firm, it's important to have success stories and create a little peer pressure among practices. But I also think this has to be data driven. It's easy for lawyers to argue about change when it's an esoteric discussion. But if you can specifically point out that we employed these resources to deliver this type of revenue and these practices, and here's the profit and the contribution margin from that, and this differs from the old way of doing things, everyone will get on board. It's change where we can't prove that it's beneficial that's a challenge to undertake.
Just in closing, what, in your estimation, is big law going to look like in 5 years? Are most firms going to be, in the Am Law 100, going to be able to employ these changes, or is this something where we're going to see a couple firms, large firms, close their doors?
Probably both. I think we're going to see some big firms that do not have the agility to change, and they're going to struggle and possibly downsize or even disband. But I also think the intellect and the momentum that big firms can bring to this topic, once they figure it out, it's a simple economic concept, understanding the learning curve and how to drive profitability, not just through top-line growth, but through addressing their infrastructure and the way they deliver services. And if they can lower those costs, they have great momentum, and I think the firms in the lower tiers that are winning right now on simply fee arbitrage should look out.
All right, Tim Corcoran, thanks so much for stopping by today.
Thank you.
If you'd like to learn more about the issues we just discussed, be sure to check out our offerings on BloombergLaw.com and also on the Bloomberg Terminal. You can see more of our videos on YouTube, and you can follow our updates on Twitter. I'm Pacchia. Thanks for watching.